And once again, welcome to the Shadow Gallery. I am, as always, your host, James Donnelly. And tonight, for those of you who may have caught my earlier segments, thank you. But tonight we're going to continue talking, and this time we are going to talk about my 10 favorite creator runs in comic book history. Now, this is basically, like I said in my last video, this was a poll I think that's either being done by Comic Book Resources or Robot 6, which they're basically asking, to put in your comments, put in a comment saying, okay, well, this is my favorite, these are my favorite creator. Now, this is basically, this can be just a writer or a writer-artist combination of people on a particular comic. So there were a number of rules, number of regulations, number of codicils, a number of you know what I'm saying. I just can't think of the fucking name. I can't think of the fucking word right now. Anyway, so some of these were that the run had to be 8 issues or longer, that this creator or creative team had to be on it, and it also had to be, it couldn't be a self-contained either mini or maxi series. So you couldn't do, for instance, if you wanted to, you couldn't do like Marvel Superhero Secret Wars. You couldn't do Watchmen. You couldn't do Daredevil Born Again. You couldn't do Year One, obviously, because it's not long enough. But even so, so there were a number of things that were disqualified immediately. So this is basically what the list that I'm going to be going down and talking about are my favorite runs of all time by any comic creator on a single comic book. And generally these are going to be continuing comics or ongoing comics that are just right there. So let's kick it off. I'm going to have a runner-up in this particular category. And that is going to be J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen and Kevin McGuire on Justice League International, or when it was just Justice League and then became Justice League International, and then also became Justice League Europe. But more specifically, DeMatteis, Giffen, and McGuire doing Justice League and then Justice League International, because that is some of the most fun comics I've ever read, because they had action, they had character, they had heart, and they had humor up the wazoo. I mean, it was just awesome. It was really a breathtaking run of anybody, and I had I believe that they have a collection of, not quite an omnibus, but like a couple of collections of that in trade. I had the first one, which is like the first 10 or 11 issues of Justice League and then Justice League International. I know I do have the first issue of Justice League when it was, after, this was the post-Legends reboot that was done by John Byrne. The team that was, Batman, Martian Manhunter, Black Canary, Guy Gardner, Blue Beetle, Dr. Light, the good Dr. Light, of course, Batman, Dr. Fate, Shazam, or Captain Marvel, excuse me. And it was a tremendously fun, tremendously good comic, and I loved it. So that was terrific, and that's my runner-up. So moving along. So number 10 is Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips's Criminal. This is obviously an ongoing comic. At least I hope so, anyway. Pretty much all of their collaborations have been pretty awesome. From Criminal to Incognito to obviously now Fatale to Sleeper. I mean, these are, just absolutely magical. These are just brilliant books. Very, very, very dark, very noirish, but always just a little bit of fun to be had with some of these characters and some of these, different types of, the people that the characters that populated these worlds that they had created, or at least had, worked their way into. Obviously, with Sleeper, that was obviously under the Wildstorm imprint, but just, it just showed the genius that they have, like the perfect marriage of, writer-artist that they have. That's just, I mean, it's one of the very best in comics. Probably arguably the best in comics right now at this point in time. There are others that are quite good, but this was, Criminal from day one has been just brilliant, and of course, Last of the Innocent was just blew me away. It just totally blew my socks off, and it was just, it was a perfect example of why that's a great, great comic. Number 9 is Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan's Tomb of Dracula. Now, Tomb of Dracula, the reason that this is almost kind of automatic to me is that they redefined basically what they were, basically what horror comics could be for the 70s. I mean, action-packed, very scary, very clever, very cleverly written characters, very cleverly designed arcs, and of course, amazing artwork by Gene Colan. I mean, it was just, that's why it's always, a bit of a heartbreaker to me, a man like Gene Colan is gone, because he was a master of art and of creativity, and just, but thank God that his work will live on forever, because, I mean, truly, especially Tomb of Dracula, I mean, this is really where, kind of, I know that, Marvel has had its hands in other supernatural horror characters, like Damien Hellstrom and, kind of Ghost Rider, but mostly not. But all of the comics of all the horror comics of the 70s, of all of them, this is, the definitive one. This is the book that really put horror back on the map. And this is, this is not just the 70s run. There was a run that they did in the 80s under the Epic imprint, which was the Day of Blood, Night of Redemption, 4-issue arc there, and then they reteam again for Dark Horse to do the Curse of Dracula, which was another extraordinary book. But Tomb of Dracula is definitive. Their run on Tomb of Dracula is definitive of basically of 70s 70s comic book horror. No question. Number 8 is Alan Moore's Saga of the Swamp Thing. It's just, I mean, it's almost rote at this point in time. I mean, this is, again, this is 80s horror that we're coming into now. And, you know, you have him creating characters or redefining characters that would continue, you know, that would continue well on into, you know, now. I mean, you know, I mean, obviously just the creation of John Constantine, you know, and basing his look on Sting, which on a couple of pages, if you have read that run, I mean, it's like you can totally tell, yes, this was supposed to be Sting, you know, during like kind of the synchronicity era of the Police. And, you know, basically, you know, this is a character that has survived for, you know, a couple of decades now since his creation. Almost, almost, Christ, almost 30 years that he's been around, and has been around pretty much consistently since his creation. I mean, when they finally decided to put him in his own book in whatever year that was, and then, you know, Hellblazer has been, you know, one of the titles of the Vertigo line. But I mean, again, this is just, you know, that's just giving it some, you know, lip service. But really, I mean, there comes a time when a character redefinition or redesign, if you will, really doesn't work within the confines of what previous writers have constructed for them. But, you know, when Len Wein or Wine, however you pronounce his last name, and Bernie Wrightson had both kind of left, you know, it was declining. It wasn't selling extremely well, and, you know, DC had found this, you know, this super, this super young writer at the time, you know, working in England, and they said, well, here's a book, can you kind of spruce it up for us? So, I mean, he took, you know, just his first real issue, you know, of the anatomy lesson, he took the idea of the Swamp Thing and he made it as though, okay, well, it's not Alec Holland that went on fire, covered in the biorestorative formula, that ran into the swamp and then ran into the water and then kind of, you know, became Swamp Thing. No, the chemicals that were in the biorestorative formula and, you know, his kind of connection to the green, as we know now, the green, created this analog of Alec Holland out of, you know, this massive, you know, thing of the swamp. So I mean, it took horror to the mature level. I mean, that's, you know, I mean, that was kind of like the tagline that they used, you know, mature horror. And I think it was, I believe it was also the first book to ever have the suggested for mature readers, you know, little, you know, text on the book there, because it really was. I mean, there was some pretty serious bloodletting in these books. There was some language. There was very, 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 you know, non-nudity nudity. Some interesting sexual issues there, you know, between Abby and of course, Swamp Thing. But just, I mean, to take a character, redefine it, and run with it, and make it feel like, okay, well, this is kind of logically what would have happened. I mean, it's almost kind of, you know, as if Alan Moore stepped in and said, you know what, I like your guys' idea, but I want to enhance it a little. I want to fiddle with it. I want to work with it. And this is, and make it better, make it more seamless of a transition, other than, okay, well, it's just a guy who ran into the swamp covered with a formula and then came out because of the swamp and was covered with all the swamp stuff. So, again, you know, that is defining stuff for the 80s for horror, and of course would come to shape what would eventually become Vertigo Comics. I mean, everything Vertigo came out of Alan Moore's work. in the 80s. And I think this is, obviously the biggest part of that, maybe due to his work on Saga of the Swamp Thing. Now, of course, I mean, as far as artists, you can't really pick just one, but you had two. You had John Totleben and Stephen Bissette, who kind of alternated, but their artistic styles were very similar, so that it was a very seamless transition. I mean, it's like I could read, the whole thing front to back, and I could not tell you, okay, well, this is the one John Totleben did, and this is the one that Stephen Bissette did. But it's absolutely fantastic stuff, and it's mind blowing how it's not more recognized, I think. Number 7 is. Am I on number 7? Yeah, I'm on number 7. Number 7 is, and this is almost kind of automatic, but is Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's Avengers. I'm not saying that just because it's the movie, all the stuff, all the Avengers, so on and so forth. That was not the reason this was brought to mind. Obviously, Kirby and Lee did some amazing stuff that they created. I mean, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. But the thing that drew me most to their run together on the Avengers was the characters that they brought in, the characters that they would take out, the characters that, it made, the possibility of a team book seem not only smart, but marketable. As much as Justice League of America is it's a great idea, bringing, the best heroes, bring Green Lantern, Batman, Flash, Superman, Wonder Woman, bring them all on the same team, bring their most recognizable players to the table, and of course throwing in some extras, is a fantastic idea. But what Lee and Kirby did is they took, they obviously they gave you Thor, they gave you Iron Man, they gave you Giant Man, or Ant-Man, they gave you Wasp, and they gave you the Hulk. For one issue, those guys stuck together. Second issue, Hulk, gone. Fourth issue, Captain America comes in. His revival, the revival of one of Jack Kirby's co-creations from 1940, is brought back in 1964. And, gave this whole new life to this character that, frankly, in the 40s was very simple. It was, rally behind the flag. It was, that was the gist of the work that Simon and Kirby did on Captain America. But then, when you had Lee and Kirby together on this title, you brought in Captain America, and it just jumped out at you all of a sudden. I mean, you had these great Kirby covers and these great Kirby layouts, and you had the Avengers versus Baron Zemo, who was responsible for Bucky's death. And then so bringing this whole character and bringing this arc to the Avengers that would play itself out over the course of several issues before ultimately Cap got his own kind of co-starring role with Iron Man in Tales of Suspense. But it was just, it was so awesome. And then to ditch some of your big star players within a very, very short period of time, and then to give you Hawkeye, Scarlet Witch, and Quicksilver, and Captain America. So, I mean, basically, you had, the man with the plan. You had the mission man, the strategy man, and then you had, a one ex-criminal, sort of, and you had two mutants. And none of them had their own books, none of them were stars, none of them have their own books now, except for Hawkeye, of course, and that's been after several abortive attempts to bring Hawkeye to vivid life. So, I mean, it was just, so, I mean, it wasn't like the Justice League, whose roster hasn't really changed much over the years. But the Avengers, it changed constantly. And it still worked. So, I mean, that to me was a huge reason as to why the book kept doing so well and kept being so smart, is because it stayed current. It didn't just say, okay, well, we're going to pack all of our stars into one, into one book, and that's going to be it. That's how we're going to do it for the next 30, 40, 50 years. No, they said, we're going to be doing it a little bit smarter. We're going to work a little bit harder. We're going to give the audience not what they expect, but what they actually, what they don't think they want, but they actually really do. So that is why the one pick of mine of Lee and Kirby's on this list is the Avengers. So that brings us to number 6. And that is Greg Rucka's Queen and Country. Now, Agent 42Q has, he's basically, he gave me kind of a viewer suggestion on my viewer suggestion video, where I asked you, some things that you'd like me to vlog about. And he said, what are some of your favorite runs of a comic? Well, it's like, because you have here, I have here Queen and Country, and obviously, I mean, we have a cover here. We have I would like to have all of the full size trades. I don't. I just have the digest size trades, but that's not really that big of a deal. And of course, I can't say, well, it was Greg Rucka and artist, because the artist constantly changed with each new operation. So I mean, this is just one of the things that Queen and Country did. Is not only did it bring a very, almost frighteningly realistic portrayal of almost, kind of like a Jean Le Carré style of espionage to comics, but it gave us probably the most unlikely and most vulnerable heroine that I've ever seen in a comic, and that, of course, is the character of Tara Chase. I mean, she is just, she's absolutely fantastic in this, as, Minder 2, then, of course, then would later become Minder 1. And the book did change around. It did change things up a little bit. It would go from, okay, well, but it always had this kind of through line of, this story that we're following Tara down. And these things would happen that would sometimes take place off the page, that would, it wasn't like, okay, well, here's, what happened to, for instance, there is a character that she begins to have an affair with. It's one of the other Minders, and he dies. And it's not something where it's, the kind of typical comic book moment where you would have, let's say, just, for instance, that they're both on a mission, they're both, fighting off, making the last stand against, this kind of Butch and Sundance last stand style type of thing, where they're, up against all, a whole bunch of whatever villains, and he gets shot, and she holds him while he dies or anything like that. It actually it doesn't even, it's never even shown in the book, his death. Never even shown. It's just there's an investigation into it, and natural causes. You know. So I mean, it was just, that's the kind of stuff that makes this book so great, is that it doesn't take itself out of reality. It stays very, very firmly grounded in reality. I mean, like I said, it's almost unreasoningly realistic. Like, you just can't think of how could Rucka create this world that is so, like, you know, it's so not airbrushed. It's so non-glamorous. You know, I mean, I know that, like Le Carre, and people like him and Frederick Forsyth and Robert Ludlum kind of took some of the glamour out of, like, kind of the Ian Fleming-esque, spies. But here, Greg Rucka he really kind of seals the deal here, and does it in a way that is elegant, that is incredibly intelligent, and almost heart-stoppingly suspenseful in some ways, and incredibly emotional too. It's a very, very emotional journey that we go on as we follow Tara Chase and the other minders, and of course the various heads of the departments, Paul Crocker and everybody like that, and Donald Weldon and so on and so forth. I mean, it's a masterpiece of a book, and something that people who are fans of the Punisher right now, that see what Greg Rucka can do with the Punisher, really need to go back and get these books. They're all pretty inexpensive. I mean, this is $20, and it's lots and lots of issues, and it's the first 12 issues as well as the some other stuff, but it's just great stuff, absolutely brilliant. Moving on, so we're at number 5 now, and number 5 is Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams' Batman. Their run on Batman is maybe not as quote-unquote definitive as, say, like Miller and Mazzucchelli doing Year One, or Miller doing Dark Knight. But it was their run that yanked the camp out of what was going on in the 60s, because basically the comics had been for many years, and this is certainly not a diss on like people like Carmine Infantino or anything like that, but they were just kind of like, okay, well, here's a new kind of brightly colored villain, who's doing just me. Here's a it was Batman going into space, and it was like, then it kind of started coming back down to earth, and then all of a sudden it got really got really colorful and kind of campy, and that ultimately ushered in Batman 66, or what the television show has kind of become to be known as Batman 66, in which we have obviously this totally absurd and at times wonderful television show because of its absurdity, because of its high levels of camp. But I mean, it wasn't too far off from what they were doing with the book. And this is Batman. Okay? Batman is a guy who dressed up like a bat and started to fight crime because his parents were murdered, and he wanted to make sure that nothing like that ever happened to anybody else. it was a mission that he would ultimately never be able to succeed in fully, but it was something that he committed himself to. And throughout at least, the 40s, some of the 40s, obviously the Bob Kane, Bill Finger, or, Bill Finger mostly, and then some Bob Kane, depending upon the kind of stories that you read about. It became, again, it was very kind of grim and gritty at the very beginning, and then would later, we would have Robin and so on and so forth. That brought a bit of levity to it. Still, it wasn't a great comic, but it was a great character, and it was a dark character. I mean, if you look at, obviously, at some of those covers from back then, and this is, I'm talking about like kind of, before the war and everything like that, where they were kind of using a lot of titles to sell bearer bonds. But if you look at some of the Detective Comics titles back then, or look at their covers, I mean, you can see this is meant to be a very, very dark comic. And basically they not only brought, O'Neill and Adams not only brought the dark back, but they made it darker than it had ever been before. They took away, they yanked it away from the camp. It no longer was the Caped Crusader. He was now the Dark Knight detective. And that was something else that O'Neill did very smartly, was that he kind of added the detective back to it. But most importantly, they added the dark. And of course, not only, obviously the creation of, Ra's al Ghul, and the League of Assassins, and Talia, and so on and so forth, but, kind of the phasing out of Robin, kind of, and then, having, characters like, Schloss, and, the Reaper, and, if you read that issue, Night of the Reaper, that's a really, really, really dark book. Where you've got basically, the first page is Batman with the blade of a scythe through his chest, impaled upon a tree. This is not, pow, biff, bam anymore. This is definitely something that is light years apart from what that was. And they did this, over the course of a couple of years, and it was, for those couple of years, very dark, and, still not too separated from the, not so far distant from some of the more colorful aspects of it, but it was these two guys that really brought the darkness back to the Dark Knight. And that is something that, has forever changed comics. It's, it really is. This was, kind of its own mini revolution, if you will, because it said, because this is the progenitor of everything that would later come, and I'm also talking about, people like Steve Englehart and Marshall Rogers, and, they would take it to even, it wouldn't necessarily get darker, but it certainly got, it certainly stayed upon that same level, and even bring in, like, Joe Perro, and, of course, then he would later go on and start doing what I thought to be incredibly hacky work on a Batman in, like the 80s and the 90s during, Death in the Family and Nightfall and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so that was just, it was some great, great, great stuff that they did during their run, and just, again, because of the radical change that they had made in bringing the character forward. Because, what have you seen over, just as far as in popular culture over the past couple of decades, is we've seen, shit, the fucking, the animated series is 20 years old. But, prior to that, you had, Batman 1989, the Tim Burton, but, again, it was still, it had the right idea as far as it being a dark Batman film, because they could have easily gone for high camp, in which I do believe they do succeed in doing, but not intentionally. And that's really, of course, one of the main failings of that film. But like I said, I mean, it brought this darkness back into this character. And then, of course, you know, Joel Schumacher kind of embracing the more campy aspects. And then, of course, now Christopher Nolan, who brought the darkness back. I mean, absolutely great stuff. I mean, redefining, you know, or I should say definitive. Because everything before that, no matter how much Grant Morrison wants to trot it out and make a complete imbecile of himself, in my personal opinion, but, you know, everything before that is almost, you know, just sweep it under the carpet because it never existed. Of course, with the exception of course, his Rogues Gallery. Number 4. And I don't know if this will surprise anyone, but Chris Claremont and John Byrne's Uncanny X-Men. The Dark Phoenix Saga, Days of Future Past. I mean, these are literally defining runs. I mean, definitive runs of Uncanny X-Men. You know, Chris Claremont, this was at like the height of his abilities on this book, because after John Byrne left and John Romita, you know, other people, and then, you know, kind of John Romita came in. It really started to, and I like some of the Romita stuff a lot, but it didn't have the same punch, because, I mean, not only do you have, you know, for instance, Kitty Pryde being created here, really, but you have, you know, just some really, really fantastic work being done by the creation of these, you know, just these 2 arcs. If you just look at them on the merits of them alone, I mean, the Hellfire Club, you know, of course, I mean, the Dark Phoenix Saga, I mean, just, that is some really, really incredible stuff. And it was, you know, say what you want about Giant Size X-Men, you know, and, you know, Claremont and Cockrum also obviously did, and, you know, obviously major respect to Cockrum, but this was really what brought the X-Men into what I think we're now seeing out of the X-Men, is that it was extremely well written. It was some very intense action. It was, you know, it brought this new life into it when, you know, when John Byrne would come on board and also would help, you know, to co-plot, and of course his, you know, masterful art, you know, Child of Light, Child of Darkness. I mean, just, you know, all of these ideas that they put into the X-Men, and you know, the characters themselves, and, you know, just everything from that era is spectacular. There isn't an issue where I'd say, well, that was really bad. There really isn't. I mean, there's some, yeah, of course, but I mean, they had such a long run that there was bound to be some clunkers in there somewhere. But, you know, but it was so smart, and it was so well done, and it was just, you know, all I have to say, Dark Phoenix Saga, Days of Future Past, that's all you need to know, because, you know, everything else is still really good, but that's where you've got the big hits. And what ultimately, like I said, that would come to define, I think, even what we see from the X-Men now, for the most part. And that brings me to number 3. And obviously it's a little new, and it might ruffle some feathers out there, it might piss some people off, but that's cool. because this is subjective. I can try and base all of my all of my ideas and all of my choices on things that were trend-setting or groundbreaking or definitive. But there are some arcs of certain books, someone brings something so fresh to the table and makes it, well, astonishing. And that is Joss Whedon and John Cassaday's run on Astonishing X-Men. I mean, let's face it. Joss Whedon is a god. I don't think there can really be any question about that. And John Cassaday is also godlike. And was made even more so when he would come to work with Joss Whedon on this incredible 25-issue run that they had together. Yes, did it take a long time to come out? Of course it did. But every issue was worth the wait. Because not only did it have some fantastic cliffhangers, some fantastic just, yeah, but what? Moments at the end of certain arcs, but again, it read through like it was all one story, just with these separate arcs. I mean, with, from Gifted to, to Torn, and, then to Unstoppable. I mean, it was just, the resurrection of Colossus. Not only is that probably one of the best resurrections of a comic book character ever, but it was also, it was handled in such an extremely intelligent way. And of course, putting kind of the focus of this entire run around the character of Kitty Pryde. Obviously, those of you who know that basically Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that her character was very, very much influenced by the character of Kitty Pryde. But, the Break World, the Cure, Danger, all of these things, the Hellfire Club, or the, kind of the Morrison era, Hellfire with, Cassandra Nova and everything like that. Genosha and everything like that. I mean, it was just, this was, again, this was very much along the lines of Justice League International with, DeMatteis and Giffen and McGuire. It was, it was a perfect marriage, because you had this, obviously, this brilliant creative mind, who is a master of character and dialogue, and is not too shabby on the action either, would give us these almost, again, kind of character redefining moments for people like Cyclops, which is unfortunately something that never really got off the ground after he left, because after he was gone, this is, and I've explained this, I think, at some time or another, that, after he left and Warren Ellis and Simone Bianchi took over, it lost all of its color, it lost all of its flavor, it lost everything that was great about the book. And I've come to forgive Warren Ellis since then, because of the amazing work that he did for the 4 or 5 issues that he did of Secret Avengers. But still, that does not erase everything that I think that he did kind of fuck up on. But it did give me a newfound respect for his abilities. And I know that Warren Ellis is a talented guy, and obviously, he and Joss are going to be teaming up for their own book together. But this was, it kind of took the focus away from where it would normally be on a character like Wolverine, or even with obviously with the reintroduction of resurrection of Colossus, which could easily have gone in that direction, saying, okay, well, it's going to be completely focused on you. No, he balanced the whole run of this book and gave us some information we never had before. That we've heard sort of explanations about them, but not really to the point in which, where we have, kind of, this anti-hero of Emma Frost, who we actually come to, who becomes, it's interesting, her character development within just these 25 issues goes from, she's just crazy, she's not crazy, but she's just like a bitch, to someone, okay, I really not only respect her now, but I actually like her. She becomes a full-fledged hero in this book. And, and Cyclops showing what he can do, showing that he can lead this team, and showing that he can do it in a way that actually makes him cooler than Wolverine. That was the thing to me that stood out the most about this run, is that he actually made Cyclops cooler than Wolverine while they're in the same book. That's a very hard thing to do, and it was done undeniably. I think that Joss maybe felt like I did, that, yeah, Wolverine may be getting a little bit too much face time. So, just, again, it was heart, it was character, it was dialogue, it was emotion, it was fun, and it was astonishing. That's really the only word to use, which is why it's so appropriately titled. Moving on. So now we have number 2, the penultimate of the runs of the creative runs of all comics of all time. Again, this is subjective, so don't get angry. You can go ahead and you can disagree with me all you want, but don't get angry that you don't agree with me, because that is, of course, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. So, number 2 of all time, Brian K. Vaughan and Pia Guerrera, Y: The Last Man. 60 issues of pure, pristine, beautiful perfection. It was just a masterpiece from beginning to end. It was, and if you really look at it, it's the love story of two people that never get to have their love requited. Yorick Brown is one of my favorite comic book characters ever, because he is not, he's so not the hero, but he is. I mean, he's you know, he's an almost endless fuck up. And then, you know, you have, you know, for instance, you know, of course you have, you know, the arc with Hero. You have, of course, Agent 355, who is, you know, one of the most badass, just characters of all time. Never mind the fact that she's a woman. You know, you have you have Allison Mann. I mean, you know, it was just. I mean, it's just. It was just so incredibly, eminently readable. It was. I had to, like with the next book that I'm going to talk about, which is number 1. But it was literally, I got the first trade from Amazon. I rocketed through it because I couldn't put it down. I ordered the second trade the next day. 2 days later, I was ordering the third trade. A couple days after that, I was ordering the fourth trade. You know, and so on and so forth. But I mean, it was just, it became, and then I caught up. And I'm like, fuck. Now I gotta wait from month to month. But I said, hell with it. I'm just going to get them all in trade. I'm not going to go out and buy the single issues because I don't want to kind of go back and forth and collect them in the single issues. And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with just reading this in trade because it's a lot easier to just take, plop, read. And it was literally like one of the quickest reads. Not in the sense of that it's not dense or not that it's not smart. Or not that it's incredibly clever, that it's incredibly well done, that the art is beautiful, that the characters, the dialogue, the story, everything keeps remaining fresh, everything keeps remaining new. We have new alliances, new new characters, new loves, new interests, new places to go, new people to see, new mysteries to solve. And that really is the thing that's the most interesting thing about Y: The Last Man, is that the mystery is never really solved. It kind of is, but for the most part, that's still kind of guesswork. Is that there's nothing definitive that says, okay, well, this is it. This is the big reason that all of the men vanished, but a few. And just, it was fantastic stuff. It was fantastic from beginning to end, and it was just so amazing, so amazing. And I mean, just eminently rereadable. It's like, I will pick up the first. I'll pick up the first trade, and I'll read it, and I'll be like, fuck, now I gotta read the next one. Fuck, now I gotta read. Okay, now it's 7 o'clock in the morning. I have to go to work in a couple of hours, but you just can't put it down. Oh my god! But again, Vaughn Guerrera, it was again one of those perfect mirrors. And believe me, I know that Brian K. Vaughan has done some incredible work over the course of his career, but Ex Machina and Runaways are not on this list. They are in their own ways both excellent, and they're both again eminently readable. I wouldn't, but they just don't quite reach the same levels. Ex Machina, to be fair, this would be in the next, in like the lower 10. Not like the low 10. I mean, like 11 through 20, I guess. Because Ex Machina is brilliant, but just Y: The Last Man, it's my second favorite book of all time. And so, therefore, it is my second favorite creative run of all time, because these are two people that never left the book. And that brings me to number 1. Those of you who know me probably know where I'm already going. I don't really... you've, of course, heard me talk about it, but it is Garth Ennis and Preacher. Preacher was the first book that I had read that it predating Y the Last Man. This was the first book that I had ever read where I went into when I was living in Chicago and I was working in a mall that had a comic book shop in it, which is always a bad idea for me to work anywhere near a comic shop because half your paycheck ends up going into the comic book shop. But that's really kind of where I started recollecting, and ultimately was offered a job just like 2 weeks before I got fired from the job that I was working at in the mall, and of course went immediately over to the comic book store and asked them, is the job still open? It was an assistant manager position, and they had already filled it. Fuck. I had one chance to work in a comic book shop, and it was gone. But Preacher, I was on my lunch break, and I walked over there. I said, I don't know really what I want to read something new that I haven't read before, and I heard some really good things about Preacher. People kept it was on a lot of people's tongues. People that worked at the shop, they kind of say, have you checked out this book? And I'm like, no. And then I looked at the first trade, I started kind of flipping through it, and I'm like, oh, this looks really interesting. And I bought it, and the next day I was in the shop getting the next trade. And it was literally, there were, I think at that point in time, there were five trades that were out, and just started buying them, and just bought them literally about, I think it was 8 or 9 days before I had all 5 trades and had read, and probably by the 10th or 11th day I had read all of them. And then I reread them. And then I reread them. And then the next trade would come out, and I would pick that up, and then I was caught up. I was so in love with this book that I'm like, okay, I'm just going to start getting the individual issues now. I'm going to dig in, I'm going to get some back issues, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to get the monthly ones, and I'm going to buy the trades. Because this book is just too fucking incredible for me to just have them bagged and boarded and everything like that, and not be able to read them like all the time. And again, even more so than Y the Last Man, will I go back to Preacher and I will reread it. This is a book that is probably arguably the most blasphemous thing in existence. I grew up Catholic, so and people will say that I grew up Catholic, so I'm entitled to kind of hate on, religion, and not hate on it, because I don't hate it. I just, the organization of the, but more like the mythology of the religion, if you will, is that I understood what was being talked about, and I appreciated where all of these things were coming from. And this was one man's, really 2 men, because obviously Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon did all of the numbered issues of, and some of not even the numbered issues of Preacher, because there were the tie-ins, and there you would have other artists that would come in, Peter Snedberg, Snedberg, and Steve Pugh, who's currently doing Animal Man, They came in for a couple of issues. They would do the Saint of Killers. They would do the story of You Know Who. Of course, the story of Arseface. And then, of course, then would do what was kind of my favorite of the kind of tie-in titles, which was the story of... I can't remember exactly what it's called. But it's the story of Star. And how he would come to be in the Grail. And this, to me, I mean, it was the most fascinating assembly of characters that I had not ever read, certainly, but they were some of certainly the most unique characters that I'd ever read. And things changed throughout the book. Again, when you have 63 issues of a book plus some tie-ins, you have, things are obviously going to change. They're going to happen. They're going to, certain characters are going to die. But ultimately, this book led up to a final confrontation that worked on a number of different levels. I mean, it wasn't just that each book, that each arc it was just continuing on until you eventually got to this point, in much the same way that like a television show like The Wire was not about, it wasn't just, Jimmy McNulty eventually going to have this huge confrontation with Avon Barksdale or Stringer Bell or whatever. You would have, I remember a lot of people, there was a lot of hell that Ennis and Dillon caught over the final issue of this book. And I submit to people who would give that issue hell, how do you think that this book otherwise should have ended? Because if you take the second to last issue, that would have been a great ending, but it would not have been a perfect ending, because it wouldn't have left anything unanswered. All the questions were answered for the most part. All of the conflicts were resolved. But we had to have, except for one, and that is where the final issue ultimately comes into place. And that's where it fulfills its promise to take us on this ride and to give us this, finale that will not only, that some people will say, except for this final confrontation, doesn't work. But I think that within the confines of this book, it absolutely, totally, 100% works. Am I not happy with every little bit of it? Yeah, there's some of it that I wasn't too pleased with as far as the way that it wrapped up. But I'm getting off track here. But just Preacher, the journey of Jesse Custer and Tulip O'Hare and Proinsius Cassidy, excuse me. And I don't even know how to pronounce that word, that name properly. It's a fine Gaelic name. But just the magic that Ennis brought to every issue, and the sex, the blood, the blasphemy, the language, it could not have gotten purer as an entertainment, as something that was incredibly thoughtful, but not ever stepping into the arena of, well, you know what, it's so smart that, people are just not going to get it. It never veers too far off course from it being ultimately a very dirty book. And I mean dirty in the sense that it's sweaty, it's grimy, it's bloody, it's, you know, it's, you know, it gets into the muck and the mire, and it never really pretends to be anything other than what it is, which is ultimately, again, a love story between two people, and the friendship between two other people, and, you know, and a quest, you know, almost Arthurian quest, but, you know, even more than Arthurian, because this is the ultimate quest to find God. And I mean, not just within the self, but within the universe. Where is he? You know, I mean, that's what that. Again, it's just it's a perfect book. Again, from beginning to end, it never strays off course. It never goes into, well, yeah, we're kind of, you know, we're making a bit of a Western. Here, yeah, we're dabbling a little bit into horror. Here, yeah, we're dabbling a little bit into, you know, not politics, but a little bit of that, and, you know, and we're going to, you know, kind of thumb our nose at everything along the way except for the Western element, because when it comes down to it, this is a Gothic Western through and through and through and through and through. And it's and, you know, people keep talking about turning this into a film or a TV show. Just let it go, because to me, the perfect Jesse Custer, unfortunately, has died. I think the perfect Jesse Custer would have been Heath Ledger, particularly after seeing him in Brokeback Mountain, but also seeing him in other things. You know, I thought about that long before, you know, like Dark Knight or anything like that. I just, you know, it was one of those things where it's like, oh man, he would have been so awesome as Jesse Custer if they decided to make, you know, a television program, because there's no way The Preacher ever works as a film. There's no way that it ever works as a film. This is why The Last Man can't work as a film. You know, just so many of these things that we just talked about cannot work as films. They could work as television programs. Why The Last Man? I could see it being more of a television program than Preacher. But, again, who knows? Who knows what the future has in store. But anyway, obviously, like to hear what you think. You know, what is your favorite? You know, what are some of your favorites? What really turns you on? I'm not gonna. I do feel like I have to use some of the same rules. You know, if you do want to, you know, put in some comments about what you think or so on and so forth, don't just give me, you know, what, you know, don't just, you know, again, don't just say, yeah, Dark Knight or, you know, Watchmen or anything like that, because, again, self-contained, obviously my favorite is not even on this list. My favorite, you know, fictional work of all time is, you know, it's V for Vendetta. And it's not on here because self-contained, and so that's the way that it has to be. So, thank you for watching. Again, if this is your first time here, subscribe. Obviously, this has been going on for almost an hour and 10 minutes. So, if you're planning on subscribing, know what you're getting into. Yes, my videos are normally this long. Because I love talking comics, and I love talking with you guys about comics. If I did it any other way, it would just fall flat on its face. And that's why I do what I do here. So, sorry, I just thought I saw something weird. But, yes, that's the kind of shit that I'll go on about. But anyway, point is, feel free to subscribe, thumb it up, thumb it down. comment, criticize, complain. I welcome all feedback as long as it's constructive. Don't be a dick. Most basic rule I can think of. Trolls can go fuck themselves. And so yeah. But that's it for this special segment of the Shadow Gallery. I, of course, will be here Monday night with my normal review show. And until then, this is James Donnelly saying good night from the Shadow Gallery, reminding you to always stay in the shadows.